Greetings, this is M Squared. We're going to solve and graph some absolute value inequalities. Just keep in mind, let me refocus that again. Keep in mind that absolute value inequalities are compound inequalities. So we'll get that and or thing going on. In fact, when you have an absolute value less than, it's an and. So that means we have, as a graph, we have that line segment. And if it's a greater than, we have our or, which means we'd have two rays when we graph it like that. So it's important to keep that in mind. It's to know what you're looking for before you begin. When we talk about the absolute value of a number being less than a number, for example, the absolute value of x is less than 3, remember absolute value means how far I am from 0. So this expression really means I want all the x's that are less than 3 from 0. So if we look on our number line and these are our 3's, 3 away, so that would be everything in here. That's why it's an and, because it's everything in here. If you were talking about the absolute value of a number being greater than 3, which means all the numbers that are more than 3 away from 0, that would be all the numbers out there. So you'd see how it's two rays. Now every once in a while, remember we check for negatives on that right side. In equations, it meant when the absolute value was low and we had a negative on one side, it meant there was no solution. It's a little bit different when you're dealing with inequalities, because if I say I want all the numbers that are less than -2 away from 0, that one is similar to the other one. That's a no solution. You can't be less than -2 away from 0 on the number line. You're either 0 or more than 0 away. But if I said all the numbers that are more than -2 away from 0, well, that's all numbers. All the numbers that you can think of on the real number line are more than -2 away from 0. So those are some special cases. You might get into that this year. Every once in a while you might have one of those, and you might not, but interesting information. So we're going to solve. So our first step, of course, is to get the absolute value alone, check for negatives on the right side in case it's one of those guys, and then write to inequalities. Remember, a less than is going to be an and a greater than is going to be an or. Then we write two inequalities and we do it like this for each one of those. And we solve and check. And of course, we're going to graph too. So on these are simple ones. The absolute value is already alone. So we're ready to write our two equations. So for the first equation, whatever was in the absolute value goes down, and then whatever the inequality sign and the number goes down too for the first equation. The second equation, we just switch these last two. So it would be 2x plus 4. Instead of less than, we'd say greater than. Instead of 6, we'd say the opposite of 6. So now we just solve. So we minus 4, we get 2x is less than 2. When we divide by 2, we get x is less than 1. So that's our first solution. Over here, when we minus 4 from both sides, we get 2x is greater than -10. And when we divide by 2, we get x is greater than -5. Remember, this is an and. So when I go to graph it, I'm at -5 and 1. Since these are less thans and greater thans, those are open circles. And because it's an and, I want all the numbers that are less than 1 and bigger than -5. So I would shade in the middle. On to the next one, our two equations. The first one is the same except without the absolute value sign. And the next one, we just switch the sign and the right sign, S-I-G-N. Let's see, so we go from greater than to less than, and then we switch it to the opposite, -9. Okay, so now we're going to add 3 to both sides. 5y is greater than or equal to 12. And over here, when we add 3 to both sides, we get 5y is less than or equal to -6. So we have to divide by 5. And some of you are thinking, oh, I hate fractions. Well, fractions are our life. So we've got to learn how to deal with fractions, and it's okay. If you want to, you got to know kind of where that number is in order to graph it properly. But if you want to graph it as a fraction, you can. Or you can graph it as a number. So you just divide that. And this one is -1.2, and this one is +2.4. And so most people like decimals, so I'll shout out for all those decimal lovers and do the decimals. So we have a -1.2 and a 2.4. Closed circles, because it's included, that line means that it's including these numbers. And we know from the beginning, because it was a greater than, that this is an or, so we know we're going out like that. And that is how to solve some absolute value inequalities. Go to the next lesson for the next step up, where they get a little more challenging. M squared, signing out.